Hello, everyone. Welcome to F1L and to our meeting in The Hague. I'm delighted to be able to bring you a short interview with Professor Yossi Sheffi from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Professor Sheffi is an academic, the Elisha Gray II Professor of Engineering Systems at MIT. And importantly, from F1L's point of view, he is director of the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. So, Professor, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the F1L community. I'd like to start with a general question, if I may, on the global logistics sector. So in a holistic sense, where do you believe we are at the moment in freight logistics right now? Has it proven its capabilities and resilience, tackling deliveries during COVID and today's geopolitical disruptions, and shown, I think, what you describe as general resilience, or has it simply highlighted the limitations and constraints that we all face in global trade?
Thank you very much for having me, and good day, everybody. Well, to answer the questions, I think that for our profession, supply chain management, transportation, logistics, COVID was a watershed. Until January 2020, when people asked my wife, "What's your husband doing at MIT?" She said, "He's doing research on supply chain management." The response was like a deer in the headlight. What is that? About 6 or 7 months later, she went to the local supermarket to buy something, and there was no, I think it was oranges. And she asked the 17-year-old cashier, "Why there are no oranges?" And he said, "Ma'am, don't you know we have supply chain management problem?" So it got to the point that the consumer started understanding what's involved. By and large, I think it was, to quote Winston Churchill, their finest hour. Because by and large, we did not have problems. By and large, people did not go hungry, despite crazy, that's a technical term, by the way, despite the headlines that said shortage of meat, shortage of eggs, shortage of this, shortage of that. There was no shortage. I mean, for a week or two, there was no the basic cut of meat that you wanted, at least in US and European supermarket. But by and large, there's a cornucopia of stuff available, all kind of other options. If you think just the food supply chain, what happened to them? From one day to the next, all restaurants were closed, all universities were closed, all industrial parks were closed. In the US, at least, it's half the food. Well, the food kept going. Supermarket kept, being supplied, even though there were runs on the supermarket and the headlines were creating fear. So I wrote about it quite extensively, as I said, in various ways, but I think it was their finest hour. In fact, the freight and logistics sector had proven very resilient, because he read a book about pandemics and decided that there's no, in fact, in my first book at the 2005, I wrote that there are not enough ventilators in the United States in case there's a pandemic. But Clinton did something about it, and then President Bush built it significantly more. Of course, he had 9/11, and so he was very, very sensitive to it. President Obama let it wither away, went almost to nothing. And I don't know if President Trump even knew that it's there, but we got caught. We got caught with dependence on China and very short inventories.
So, Professor, you're taking what appears to be a somewhat optimistic stance on this, which is great. And therefore, you're not worried about the world of trade being too interconnected, too global. You don't see much evidence of reshoring or friendshoring. That's not a worry to you.
No. First of all, I tend to think I'm not optimistic, I'm realistic. There is some reshoring going on, a lot less than the media thinks. There's some reshoring going on, but it's actually, a lot of it is political, and I'm not subject to what people want to see, because the problem is as follows. Get out of China. Companies spend decades and billions of dollars building a whole ecosystem in China. It's not the final assembly. You can move the final assembly to Vietnam or to Mexico, to the US. It doesn't mean much if you still depend on parts and ingredients and materials coming from China or somewhere else. So yes, you move it to Vietnam, the final assembly, and you get the label made in Vietnam. This is not moving it out of China. Unless you move the entire system out of China, which, by the way, is not easy. It takes a lot of money. And let's not forget the Chinese suppliers are becoming very good. They're very responsive. They're not expensive. They're very good. And another thing that one should not forget is that China is a huge market and becoming more nationalistic, which means you want to sell in China, you better build it in China. So I see limited people moving, whether it's reshoring or friendshoring. Yeah, it happens, incrementally. The direction of the geopolitical direction, the relationship between US and China is not going in the positive direction. It's still going, down, and we could come to a crisis. I cannot imagine what will happen if there'll be an attack on Taiwan. What I'm worried about, and it's not that I'm optimistic. I said there's nothing to worry about. For example, we just had pandemic. In the pandemic, what saved us is online, e-commerce, Zoom. We could continue function. What happened if there's a substantial cyber attack? And it will be exactly the opposite. Credit cards don't work, Zoom don't work, e-commerce doesn't work. You have to go back to the store and, and get stuff. And unfortunately, what I see is companies and governments worry a lot about the next pandemic. I think there's not enough worry about our increasing dependence on digital infrastructure. Even the physical component of the infrastructure are depending on the digital infrastructure. So as we saw when the pipeline, the continental pipeline was shut down due to a cyber attack.
So just on that note, and talking more generally about risk, because all of the people in the room here and our supply chain community are always analyzing risk, looking at investment opportunities. And I know one of the things that you've looked at is investment models and how you define risk, which is particularly important these days, given the difficulties with whether that's sustainability or geopolitical risk or whatever. How can you help us a bit with the risk model and how one should look at investment opportunities?
I would be a lot more successful in Wall Street investment if I could answer this with certainty, obviously, with my own investment. It's a difficult question because there's so many things that are, let's talk about risk, for example. We talk about risk of dependence on China. So the problem is that risks, sometimes what we do to mitigate risk is creating another risk. So for example, the US sustainability efforts, and China is the source of most of the rare earth minerals. You know which country has more rare earth mineral in the ground than China? It's the US. But we don't mind them because of environmental law. So the question is, what's your poison? Do we want to, not solve the global warming problem? Or are we okay with dependence on China? These are two different risks. And somehow, what I think is the biggest risk is that government and politicians don't think systemically. So they are the group that just cares about green sustainability. I cannot do, we cannot. Okay. Another group, we say the hawks about China, and just, to use this example. But at the end, we should have some compromise. So the US stop allowing oil drilling in several of the federal land as part of President Biden. Okay. Europe was lucky that the winter was not that bad. But here, I just imagine that the winter would have been bad, and Russia would have cut off all the supply. Now the question is it okay for the US to not drill, even though it has the technology, the equipment, the companies? can drill for gas, like he has more gas than he knows what to do with, but it's in the ground. But it of course will delay the transformation to renewables and the, EVs and the whole sustainability movement. So to me, if you talk about risk, is how do we adjudicate between different risks? But anyway, thinking about risks, there are many, many sources of risks. And one has to think about, give you one more example. Southwest Airlines always said that they have one way to eliminate risk is to standardize. And so people can do multiple jobs and you can. So Southwest Airlines always flew 737. And when Boeing, only 737, just one type of airplane. It's a huge airline, by the way. And when Boeing came up with the glass cockpit that was all digital, they show it to Southwest executive, expecting a big order. Southwest executives say, we love you, we'll get you a big order, but you have to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer the digital to look exactly like the old steam gauges, exactly like the analog, because we need every pilot to walk into every cockpit and be able to fly, because we are always out of position and pilots are late and the airplane are late. This worked very well until the 737 MAX. And now Southwest had a huge part of its fleet grounded. So again, I have to think about the trade-off between risks. And there's no risk-free world. So to me, the biggest risk in some sense is the lack of systemic understanding of multiple risks and the trade-offs between them.
One of the trade-offs that people are very concerned about now in supply chain management is where do they fit in? Who do they collaborate with? We always talk about this word around collaboration and moan about the lack of collaboration, but the supply chain is collaboration. That's what we do. And the concern is that you have this trade-off between a capitalist commercial advantage, I have to have my competitive advantage, and the need to move more to share, to trust, to use data together, and to work more effectively together. How do you see that trade-off evolving? Is it just something that we'll have to trial and get used to?
Okay, so first of all, there's nothing that brings people together more than a shared enemy. And during the pandemic, there are so many examples of corporate collaboration between competitors. I mean, really, thousands of examples of sharing workers, sharing data, sharing a lot. Even, the vaccine development, or sharing data among scientists all over the world. So when there are, a shared enemy brings people together. Now, the question is, why can't we do better without a shared enemy? And so there is that data sharing going on between, along the supply chain, between companies and their customers, companies and their suppliers. This is part of doing business, but it's not enough. And in fact, I'm part of an experiment led by a large company in the technology and the chip space, microchip. We got together about 20 companies to start with. We call it true demand, because what happened is, because there's lack of knowledge, we have what's called the bullwhip effect, that people are over ordering because they don't know what's going on in the supply chains. The only way that this can be mitigated is by sharing, by people not ordering. So what happened is, when they companies start feeling shortage, they say, okay, the supply is going to allocate, is going to give everybody just 50% of what they order. Guess what we'll do? We'll order twice as much. So we'll get what we need. The only problem is that everybody is doing this. So it's not a secret. So companies, there are ways that for supplier looks at the last 6 months and just give you half of what you ask for the last 6 months and stuff like this, try to ignore it. But people are being sued for not fulfilling orders, not fulfilling contracts. Some of the German auto manufacturers are notorious for this. They don't pay any attention to anything. I ordered that much, give me that much, or I'll sue you. So it happens. But so I'm part of this group that try to share data among competitors and say it happened every 3 or 4 years. It happens. This is not something new. It's not something the pandemic. It happens all the time in every industry. So we said, okay, how about if we get a group? We start with the semiconductor industry, and we start. All of us will give our data on orders and forecast to a third party. The third party will anonymize the data and use all kind of machine learning and AI to add to this data what's going on in the marketplace, geopolitical tension, whatever they can get their hands on, and get a forecast for the industry and get a forecast. So we always, let's say my market share is 20%. I'm not going to have 40% tomorrow. I can get 1% if I'm really good at it, another 1%. So let's all take a deep breath and see what's going on in the macro world and try to do it. Now, it's really people that heard about us from other industry, from pharma industry, and others are wanting to do it. We encourage people to do it in every industry and work with them. But right now we are concerned about proof of concept. And unfortunately, I guess the last few weeks have been all spent with lawyers. Because you cannot, there's the Justice Department or European Competition Commission. You cannot just collaborate on everything. So we said, okay, no prices. We cannot, even though price is a good signal, but we cannot share prices. And we just shared everything. So it's very carefully crafted how to make sure that because the problem is not so much collaboration, at least among companies who know and trust each other, even though they're competitors. We all part of a small group. The problem is the Justice Department. You cannot collaborate because they're afraid that you are going to corner the market. So we hope to get something done. This, by the way, we know there's a similar, not identical effort in Europe, because we are talking to some European collaborators, and we hope this will be something that can solve. But there's no easy solution in the environment. And by the way, we also encounter some people who don't want to any part of it. I will never give. I will not give my data.
One final quick question, Professor, if I may, because you've touched on many of these things. The future. We don't have a crystal ball, but the balance between technology and people. Yes. We, blithely talk about Chat GPT and all these exciting things that are coming along. How do you see that balance in our world?
Okay. In my last book, in my recent book, just came out last week, I'm talking about, I start with historical standard, historical preview, looking at the industrial evolutions and started with in 1587, a gentleman came to the Queen of England and he invented a machine to weave stockings. And he gave her a stocking as a gift for this. She almost beheaded him. She just disallowed this because she was afraid for jobs. She said, if we have, machines that make stocking, what would all the people do? In the Industrial Revolution, we had the Luddites, we had during the later, the labor movement came out of automating, the assembly line and simplifying the job. So, and people were afraid of jobs all the time. But history suggests that more jobs are created with technology than being not. Some jobs are lost. We don't have any more telephone operators that plug stuff in. We don't have elevators operators. So some stuff goes away for sure, but a lot more stuff is being created in several ways. One way is, give you an example. When automatic teller machine came, the ATM that you get money and you can do all kind of transaction, people thought bank tellers will go away. 300,000 bank tellers in the United States were there when ATM became widespread. There are now over 600,000. Why? Because opening bank branches became a lot cheaper. So first of all, there's the growth. Then there's the side effect. So when Ford put the assembly line, which is a big innovation, the number of employees of Ford went from several hundred who were building cars one by hand to about 150,000 at the height of the Model T. But this was not the big thing. The big thing is that cars became affordable. People started driving all around the United States. There were motels and restaurants, and the whole hospitality industry sprung up. Tens of millions of people employed because of this. Uber with an app, and everybody can drive, can find everywhere in London. You don't need the knowledge. The knowledge is in the app. So what happened is what's called de-skilling. That's one of the main things that technology de-skills the job. You need less skills to run a job, and everybody can do it. This is what is happening. And of course, there are many other jobs that are being created in technology. I mean, before we never had the people who optimize where you are on Google, or people how to place ads in Google. There are whole companies that do it. So there are a lot of new jobs that come with the technology. I think that what we see now, ChatGPT and all the generative AI, is just another tool, and it will enable democratization of work in the following sense. Think about spreadsheets. To get a model before spreadsheet, and I'm old enough to know this, you had to know how to program, you had to find a programmer, you had to talk to a lot of other people. Now you just download the data and build it yourself. And it's much better because you know what needs to be done. You don't have to go back and forth 15 times with a group, with a professional group that can program it. ChatGPT now will allow people, first of all, to write code. People can program themselves. ChatGPT can write code. Of course, it will be faster even to write prose. I actually use it. What do I use it for? It has at this point, has many limitations. It's a nascent industry, nascent product, but it's very good to get initial ideas. For example, I tell my students that they have to learn how to use it. They have to learn how to do the queries and give it feedback and work with it. So I see only plus side. Now, I have to have, this is my opinion. I have colleagues right in the office who think this is the worst thing since I don't know what, because students are now writing papers at ChatGPT and it's hard to decipher. So what? They submit the paper, it's ChatGPT. If it's a good grade, if it's a good paper, so they know how to use ChatGPT. Good for them. I'm not worried about it. It's just a new tool. I really believe there's one element that I am worried about. Because the transition in this case is based on developing software. And software can propagate and move very, very quickly. So the speed of the changes is going to be something like no industrial revolution before, because you had steam, so you had to build big factories and you have to build, a lot of infrastructure. It took decades to build all this. Now you develop the software with a click of a button; it's everywhere. So the speed, governments have to be very cognizant of the speed of change. So I think, by and large, to answer your question, I'm actually optimistic for the 10-year type of. I'm more worried about the 3-4 years type of because I don't see government preparing for change. So it's and I think it's a lot of it is government role, even in the United States. I mean, it says because that's the responsibility is the welfare of people. So
Indeed,
I hope
indeed.
people will
Thank you
think
so
about
much, Professor. I hate to stop, but I'm afraid we've gone well over our allotted time, and I'm extremely grateful. I'm pleased to know that we've still got oranges in stores. We can still buy our dishwasher powder, and we don't have to write code. So there is some good news in there.
Let me correct you in one thing. You encourage everybody to read my book. I want to encourage everybody to buy my book. Whether they read it or not,
well, yeah, indeed,
just
we will.
kidding.
And we will prompt them by taking some copies and handing them out. So definitely do that. Thank you so much for your time and, of course, your comment.